A 17-year-old guitarist stepped onto the stage to prove he was the best, until Jasmine Crockett appeared. In less than 5 minutes, his confidence crumbled, and the entire crowd witnessed a brutal truth: the difference between playing to make noise and playing to touch hearts. What did she play that shattered his ego? And what did he realize in front of millions that no one had dared to tell him before? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The sun dipped low over a forgotten Midwestern town as the Strings for Tomorrow fundraiser stirred to life. Folding chairs lined the uneven grass, filled with veterans, young parents, and quiet retirees, nursing lukewarm coffee. Kids ran past the corn dog stand, unaware of the tension brewing on the creaky wooden stage. That's where Jake, 17, stepped up, guitar slung low, eyes blazing. He wasn't just performing, he was challenging everything that dismissed him. To the crowd, he looked like another loudmouthed teen. But under that swagger lived a kid who'd bled for every note, every riff, every all-nighter with blistered fingers. They didn't see the teachers who shut him down, or the parents who called his music a phase. All they saw was attitude. But Jake came to make them hear him, even if he had to burn the stage down to do it. As the amp crackled and fingers twitched, he scanned the silent rows of older men. No claps, no nods, just judgment. So he struck the first note. Fierce, explosive. This wasn't a solo, it was a shot fired. The last note of Jake's solo still hung in the air, distorted and wild, when the quiet hum of gravel under tires cut across the crowd. Heads turned. A dusty black SUV creaked to a stop beside the main tent. It wasn't fancy. No chrome, no shine, just worn steel and road miles. The door opened, and out stepped Jasmine Crockett. No security detail. No stage entrance, just a plain black tee tucked into road-worn jeans, a charcoal blazer thrown on like an afterthought, and a thick leather guitar case in her hand, like it had never left her side. Her boots, caked in red dirt, hit the ground with a solid thud. No one spoke for a moment, but the energy shifted, like a cold front sweeping through summer heat. She moved calmly, chin up, gaze straight ahead. She didn't look around. She didn't have to. Someone near the front whispered, "Is that her?" A woman in her 50s leaned toward her husband. "Yeah, that's Jasmine Crockett, the lawyer who exposed that sheriff's cover-up last year. Remember? The town in Texas." Another man muttered, "What's she doing here?" She wasn't dressed to impress. She didn't need to be. Jasmine had the kind of presence that made space just by walking into it. Every step was steady, not slow, deliberate. She scanned the auction table without a word, paused at a black Stratocaster, and rested her fingers on its body. She didn't strum. She didn't pose. Just touched it softly, like checking if it still remembered her. That simple moment hit harder than most solos. From the stage, Jake watched all of it. He didn't know her name. Didn't care. All he saw was someone stealing the spotlight without even trying. She hadn't clapped, hadn't looked up, hadn't shown the smallest sign of respect. And now she was next to his guitar, his stage, and the crowd was staring at her like she'd already won something. Jake stepped forward, heat flaring in his chest. He leaned into the mic. "What's going on?" he said, loud enough to cut the air. "A lawyer here to show us how to play guitar now?" Some of the teens in the back laughed. His crew chuckled, but the older folks stayed quiet. Jasmine didn't look at him. She turned the guitar's tuning peg slightly, still calm. Jake pushed harder. "You gonna sue the amp for being too loud?" he called out, forcing a smile. "Maybe take us to court for bad taste in music?" More uneasy laughter. Not real amusement, just noise to fill the silence. He took it further, stepped to the front of the stage and pointed straight at her. "All right then, if you really know what you're doing, why don't you get up here and prove it?" Silence fell. This time it stuck. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. Even Jake's friends went quiet. Jasmine stood straight, took her hand off the guitar, and turned to face him. Her eyes locked on his, calm and focused. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just stared, like she was reading him line by line. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was experience. A kind of quiet strength that didn't need to yell to be heard. She took one step closer to the stage and tilted her head slightly. "You want me to play?" she asked, voice smooth, low, clear. "All right, I will." The crowd held its breath. She looked at him, then around at the audience, then back to Jake. "But let's not call it a competition." A beat of silence. Eyes stayed locked. "Let's call it a conversation." That line dropped like thunder. A few people murmured, nodding without realizing. An older man near the front leaned in, whispering, "She's not here to fight. She's here to teach." Jake froze for half a second. He'd expected her to get angry, to laugh, to walk away. But not this. Not calm, not collected. Not someone who could take all his heat and hand it back with a single sentence. "A conversation," Jake repeated, scoffing, though it didn't sound as sharp. Jasmine gave a slight nod. "I don't play to win. I play to connect," she said simply. "You should try that sometime." There were no cheers, just a slow, thoughtful quiet. Even the kids felt it. For the first time that afternoon, Jake's grip on his guitar tightened, not from confidence, but from something else, uncertainty. Jasmine stepped forward again, stopping just at the edge of the stage. "So?" she said, voice steady. "You still want to play? Or are you just here to talk?" Jake blinked. The challenge was no longer about speed or style. It wasn't about pride. It was about presence. And Jasmine Crockett had just rewritten the rules. The moment Jasmine stepped back and gave her quiet nod, something shifted around Jake, like the air itself was holding its breath. He didn't wait for any cue. No countdown, no warm-up. Just one sharp inhale, a flick of the wrist, and then blast off. His pick hit the strings like a strike of lightning, and the amp roared, pouring out thick, gritty distortion across the park. Every muscle in his body tensed as he jumped straight into his fastest licks. Tapping, pull-offs, screaming bends, one after another, back to back. He wasn't playing a song. He was unleashing one. His body moved with the beat, his fingers flashing so fast it was hard to follow. The notes shot out like bullets, clean, fast, sharp. He threw out every trick he knew, two-hand tapping, fast picking, harmonic squeals, and deep whammy bar dives. He wasn't here to entertain. He was here to dominate. His friends erupted. "That's it, Jake!" one of them yelled, bouncing on the grass. A tall kid with messy hair held up his phone, filming wildly. "Post that! He's killing it!" They all whooped like it was a rock festival. But farther back, where the older crowd sat quietly in their fold-out chairs, the reaction was different. There were no cheers, just crossed arms, quiet stares, and a few people shaking their heads. A woman in her 60s leaned to the person next to her and said softly, "Yeah, he's fast. But that's not music. That's just showing off." Jake didn't hear it. Or maybe he did and just ignored it. The adrenaline had taken over. He stomped his pedal, adding more distortion, more edge, more bite. The guitar now sounded like it was ripping through metal. He tore into a solo so fast his fingers looked like a blur, crawling up and down the fretboard like a spider on fire. He slid into a complicated arpeggio sweep, stretching across 5 strings, his hands moving like he was trying to erase the guitar itself. He hit the whammy bar again, making the strings howl. It was chaos. Loud, practiced chaos. The crowd near the front kept shouting and clapping, but everyone else around the park stayed quiet. Jake was loud. He was fast. But for some reason, it just wasn't connecting. The last trace of Jake's performance dissolved into static. No one clapped. The silence wasn't awkward. It was expectant. People weren't reacting anymore. They were waiting for something to feel real. That's when Jasmine stepped forward. Jake scoffed from behind his mic, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Here we go. Let's see if the courtroom queen can actually play something." Then under his breath, but still sharp, "Hope she brought a briefcase full of excuses?" She didn't react. She didn't strut. She didn't smirk. She just walked with purpose. Measured steps, eyes calm, as if she already knew what the music would say for her. She adjusted the guitar strap across her shoulder, tugged her blazer sleeve once, and nodded slightly at the sound tech. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched. Still. Curious. Unsure. Her fingers touched the fretboard like she was greeting an old friend. No theatrics, no showmanship. Just one breath in and a single deep chord. It rang out warm and slow, cutting through the leftover distortion like sunlight breaking fog. The tone wasn't flashy, it was honest. Thick, gritty, and smooth all at once, like a voice that had spent years in smoky rooms and hard days. She let it ring, holding the neck steady, letting the crowd feel the sound settle into their bones. Then she began a slow blues riff, simple, but soaked in soul. The kind of lick that made time feel slower, the kind that made old men close their eyes and nod without realizing. It wasn't just technical, it was truthful. Every note told a story. She bent the next note slightly, held it midair, then slid down the neck with a gentle tremble that sent chills across the lawn. There was pain in the sound, but also peace. Strength, but also loss. She didn't play fast. She didn't need to. Each movement was deliberate. Each phrase, a sentence in a language only the heart understood. No flash, no fury, just raw, unfiltered feeling. It was music that had lived through something. People began to shift, quietly, leaning forward. An older man near the back lowered his sunglasses, eyes locked on her fingers. A woman wiped the corner of her eye without even noticing. Two kids who had been laughing earlier now stood still, watching like they'd never seen a guitar played like that before. Even Jake's friends, the ones who had been shouting and filming, stood frozen, silent. Jasmine's sound didn't fight for attention. It earned it. She moved into a short solo, easing her way through a classic blues rock pattern, but every note carried weight, like she'd buried something inside it. Her hands weren't showing off. They were remembering. The slide into the next phrase wasn't just technique, it was a story. It was late nights holding a crying child. It was standing alone in a courtroom full of men who didn't take her seriously. It was growing up too fast, losing friends, holding her tongue, raising her voice. All of it was there, in every bend, every pause, every gentle press of string to fret. There was no background track, no flashing lights, just her, the guitar, and the truth between them. At one point, she stepped back slightly, leaned into a single long note, and let it hang in the air like a question only the soul could answer. That's when it happened. The crowd felt it. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful, quietly powerful. Like hearing someone say, "I understand you," without a single word. Jasmine let the note fade into the wind. She didn't chase it. She didn't fill the silence. She respected it. Then came the final phrase, a slow descending lick that settled into the bottom strings, rich and full. And when she stopped, her hand didn't fly off the neck. It rested there lightly, like she was still listening to what the guitar had just said. No one moved, not right away. Then a man near the front gave a single nod. A slow ripple of applause followed, not loud, but real. Hands clapped not out of habit, but out of respect. A woman near the food stand had tears in her eyes. Two high school boys looked at each other, speechless. Someone whispered, that was music." Jasmine opened her eyes and looked up, not seeking praise, just returning to the moment. She said nothing, didn't need to. She hadn't just played, she had spoken, and the whole park had heard her. The applause hadn't even died out when Jake took a step forward, his hands clenched tight around the guitar. His face was rigid, eyes locked on Jasmine like she had stolen something from him. She hadn't said a word, hadn't gloated, hadn't even looked his way. And somehow, that made it worse. The crowd was still recovering from the weight of her performance, but Jake didn't care. He wasn't ready to surrender. Not now, not like this. He yanked the strap over his shoulder again, more like throwing on armor than preparing to play. The amp buzzed as he flipped it back on, the low hum crackling through the speakers like it already sensed the tension rising inside him. His fingers hovered, twitching, and he muttered to himself, "No way." Not like that. Then louder, defensive, eyes sweeping the crowd. "You all think that was music? It was a bedtime story. Watch what real fire sounds like." Then he hit the strings. Hard. The sound exploded. Raw, distorted, angrier than before. He charged into a riff faster than his own heartbeat, not easing in, Not feeling it, just attacking. The notes poured out like shrapnel, a storm of tremolo picking, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and wild bends. This wasn't performance. This was retaliation. He was trying to take back the stage, to smother the silence Jasmine had left behind. He clenched his jaw, eyes wide, shoulders tight, playing like the guitar owed him something. Every movement was faster, heavier, tighter. The volume roared. But the soul, it was slipping. Another arpeggio, another sliding run, another hammer-on slammed down with more force than finesse. His friends still shouted, half-hearted now. "Go, Jake!" one yelled, but it sounded more like a plea than praise. Jake didn't hear, or maybe he just couldn't afford to listen. His fingers raced again, faster this time, too fast. A note slipped. He didn't stop. A bend fell flat. He masked it with a whammy dive, trying to bury it in noise. The sound kept pouring out, but something was off, and the crowd felt it. What used to be wild confidence was now frantic energy. He wasn't leading the performance anymore. He was chasing it. Another slide, missed. Another run, sloppy. He grimaced, biting the inside of his cheek. The rhythm wobbled. The melody, if it could still be called that, fell apart under the weight of speed and panic. The guitar squealed, screamed, cracked, but it no longer sang. The more he played, the less control he had. He was gripping the strings like they were slipping through his fingers. The front row leaned back. A man in the third row shook his head slowly. Someone whispered, "He's falling apart." Another voice added, "He's not even hearing himself anymore." Jake was sweating now, his shirt sticking to his back, his breathing ragged. His hands ached, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He tried to speed up again. Faster, faster, faster than his own hands could cleanly follow. But the more he pushed, the messier it got. His picking hand started stuttering. His fretting hand dragged half a beat behind. The notes collided. Time fell apart. And still he played. Desperate now. One more burst of fury. He slammed into a two-hand tapping run, fingers hammering high up the neck like a final scream. But his left hand misfired. A note buzzed out. Then another. He covered it, barely. His face twisted. Frustration, fear, fury all tangled together. It wasn't working. It wasn't landing. The harder he tried to prove he was still in control, the more obvious it became. He wasn't. He strummed a final broken chord, too sharp, poorly timed, and dragged the whammy bar down hard, letting the guitar groan beneath his fingers. But even that sounded tired. He stood frozen for a second, chest heaving, eyes darting to the crowd. His friends clapped, but it was thin, unsure. Everyone else? Still, not angry, not mocking, just quiet. Jake lowered his guitar slightly. His arms felt heavy. His fingers twitched. Then he tried again, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. "All right, fine. I messed up, but don't act like slow and sad is the only way to play. I've still got more." And without waiting, he struck another chord, wild and sharp, trying, one last time, to force meaning into the sound. But the sound was already slipping through his hands. Jake's final attempt faded into silence like smoke after a spark. The strings buzzed one last time under his trembling fingers. And then, nothing. No cheers, no redemption. Just the low hum of his amp and a wall of stillness from the crowd. His chest heaved as he looked around, searching for something. Approval, respect, anything, but found only quiet eyes and uncertain expressions. Jasmine stood off to the side, unmoved. Her hands were relaxed, her eyes calm, but there was something new in her stare now. Not challenge, not pity, understanding. And that made it even harder to take. She stepped forward again. No announcement, no pretense. Just a small breath, a nod to the sound tech, and then she lifted the guitar like she was picking up something sacred. She didn't rush. She didn't try to outdo what came before. She simply tuned one string, pressed her fingertips lightly to the frets, and began to play. The first note was so soft, it barely rose above the ambient wind, but it carried. It wasn't loud. It was intentional, smooth, deep, clear, like a voice that didn't need to yell to be heard. The crowd leaned in. Something about the stillness made the sound feel even bigger. Jasmine didn't play to reclaim the spotlight. She played to restore balance. She slid gently into a blues phrase. Slow, aching bends. Short phrases that breathed between each note. Every movement was controlled, but never stiff. It was like watching someone speak through silence. The sound wasn't flashy, it was real. It rolled out like smoke in a dark bar at midnight, like rain on an empty street. Every note felt lived in, worn but unbroken. Her face didn't twist in performance. Her eyes didn't scan for approval. She just played, letting the guitar become the voice for something she didn't need words to say. And the crowd listened, not just with their ears but their chest. Jake stood frozen at the edge of the stage. He still held his guitar, but it suddenly felt heavier, like dead weight instead of an extension of himself. He watched her fingers move, and for the first time, realized what was missing in his own. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to feel, and she was letting everyone in. As the last phrase faded into the wind, Jasmine let her fingers rest on the neck, palm gently muting the strings. The silence that followed was full, not empty, like the end of a sentence that needed no explanation. She turned toward Jake, her voice low, warm and clear enough to cut through every thought in his head. "You play well," she said, not with flattery, but honesty. "Really well." She stepped a little closer. Her tone softened, but her eyes didn't look away. "But have you ever let the music hit you first?" The question hit Jake like a body blow. "Have you ever let the music hit you first?" Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her words landed because they were true, and Jake knew it. There was nothing for him to hide behind anymore. Not speed, not noise, not bravado. For the first time that day, he felt fully exposed. The crowd wasn't judging him now. They were waiting, not for another solo, not for a comeback, but for what he'd do with the silence that followed her question. Jake stood completely still, his guitar limp in his hands. His jaw was tight, but not out of anger. He was holding something back. His fingers, once cocky and quick, now twitched slightly against the strings like they didn't know what to do. He looked around, not at the crowd, but at the space between them, the space he used to command, now quietly slipping away. It wasn't defeat that crushed him. It was the truth of what Jasmine had said. Deep down, he'd always known he was hiding behind technique. He played to be seen, to be heard, to shout over a world that never listened. But not once had he truly let the music speak to him. A breeze swept across the park, lifting the edge of the banner above the stage. Strings for tomorrow. The words fluttered like a reminder that this moment was never about pride. It was supposed to be about connection, about legacy, about why music mattered in the first place. And here he was, standing on the stage he thought he'd own. Silent. He looked at Jasmine again. She hadn't moved. She was waiting, not for him to prove something, but to simply respond. Jake swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally came out, was quieter than anyone had ever heard from him. "Can you teach me?" The words came out almost like an apology. He didn't say train me or show me how to beat you. He said teach, a word that carried weight, a word that cracked his ego open, just wide enough to let something else in. For a second, Jasmine didn't answer. She looked at him with calm, steady eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen too many boys mistake volume for value. Then she smiled. Not wide, not smug. Just a soft, knowing smile. A real one. She stepped closer, her voice smooth, but firm enough to anchor the moment. "Let music be your first teacher," she said. "Play from the heart, not the ego." The words slid into the air like they'd been waiting for the right time to be spoken. Jake didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just nodded once, barely, like someone finally understanding the lesson they should have learned long ago. He looked down at his guitar, his instrument, his shield, his identity, and saw it differently now. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a throne. It was a mirror. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what it might show. He took a small step back from the mic. Slowly, no drama, no defiance. The way a soldier might lower a weapon when the war's over. He wasn't surrendering to Jasmine. He was surrendering to truth, to himself. The crowd was still, moved, not clapping, not filming, just breathing with him. Jasmine turned away gently, stepping off the center of the stage, not needing the spotlight anymore. She'd said what needed to be said, and now it was up to Jake. He didn't try to fill the silence. He didn't launch into another solo. He simply sat down on the edge of the stage, guitar still resting in his lap, and stared at the frets. His fingers lightly pressed a single string, not to show off, just to feel it vibrate. One quiet note rang out. Low, clean, true. The kind of note no one applauds, but everyone hears. And somehow that was more powerful than anything he'd played all day. Off to the side, a father leaned down to his son and whispered, "That's what learning looks like." A woman near the back wiped the corner of her eye. A middle-aged man whispered. He finally listened. Even Jake's friends stayed silent, hands at their sides, unsure what to say. But one of them, the long-haired kid who had yelled the loudest earlier, nodded slowly. "That was different," he said. It wasn't praise, it was recognition. Jake didn't look up. He didn't need to, because for the first time, he wasn't playing to prove anything. He was just listening to the silence, to the weight of everything unsaid, to the beginning of something new. And as the breeze moved again, carrying Jasmine's words through the trees, like a song only some people truly hear, one truth settled over the park like a quiet promise. This was the real performance. Later that night, the fundraiser lights were long gone. The stage dismantled, the crowd dispersed. But in a small bedroom dimly lit by a desk lamp and the soft blue glow of a laptop screen, Jake sat motionless with his guitar across his lap. The same guitar that hours ago he had wielded like a weapon now rested gently against his chest, like something fragile. The windows were open. Crickets hummed in the dark outside. Inside, the air was still, heavy, not with heat, but with everything left unsaid. He had barely spoken since coming home. No post-show recap, no online rants, just silence. He hadn't touched his phone, even as the notifications kept coming. Clips of his solo, clips of Jasmine's, comments piling up like a verdict forming in real time. But he didn't check. He didn't want to know what they thought. For the first time, he wasn't chasing attention. He was chasing something else, something quieter, something deeper. Jake reached across the desk and clicked play. Ain't No Sunshine began to drift through the room. Slow, low, heavy. The guitar line rolled out like fog, simple, clean, and heartbreakingly human. Jake didn't move at first. He just listened, really listened. It was the kind of sound that didn't impress. It understood. He felt the chords settle in his chest like weight. There was no speed, no distortion, just space, honesty, emotion. He picked up his guitar, almost cautiously, and let his fingers find the same notes. He didn't strum hard. He didn't try to mimic the recording exactly. He just followed. One note at a time. His right hand moved slower than usual, his left pressing gently against the fretboard. The strings felt different now, not tools but voices, and for once he wasn't commanding them. He was listening. Gone was the tornado energy, the need to impress, the frantic noise that used to define his style. Every note tonight was careful. Every rest between them was intentional. He wasn't performing. He wasn't battling. He was learning to breathe with the instrument, not breathe over it. The sound that came out was uneven at first, a little stiff, but it was honest. He repeated the phrase again, then again, and slowly the roughness faded. What replaced it wasn't mastery, it was sincerity. He stopped playing for a moment, set the guitar on his lap, reached for a crumpled piece of paper near the edge of the desk, next to some old set lists and forgotten riffs scribbled in marker. Then with a black pen, he wrote down the question, carefully, word by word, like it had been echoing in his chest since the moment she asked it. "Why do you play music?" He stared at it. 4 simple words, but they weighed more than any solo he'd ever played. Jake leaned back in the chair and exhaled, eyes drifting to the ceiling. He thought about everything, his first guitar, the basement jams, the videos he'd studied at 2 a.m., the hours spent trying to be faster, louder, sharper than everyone else, the feeling of being ignored, shut down, misunderstood. All of that had led to today, to that stage, to that silence after Jasmine's song, to the crowd that didn't need flash. They needed something real. He looked down at the paper again, read the words silently, then closed his eyes and remembered her voice. Let music be your first teacher. Play from the heart, not the ego. He hadn't understood what that meant before. Now, it was the only thing that made sense. He picked up the guitar again and played the same phrase from Ain't No Sunshine. This time even slower, letting each note ring fully before moving on. His fingers didn't shake now. They felt. His breath matched the rhythm. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing meaning, chasing connection. The string buzzed a little on the third run-through. He didn't correct it. He let it live. Because life, like music, wasn't clean. It was messy, beautiful, and true. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, something inside Jake began to shift. Not loudly, but permanently. He turned the page over and began to write again. Not a rant, not lyrics, just thoughts, fragments, feelings, things he'd never let himself say out loud. And somewhere in that quiet room, under the soft glow of lamplight and the steady thrum of the guitar in his lap, Jake began his real lesson. Not from a book, not from a teacher, but from the music itself. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but Jake's phone was already buzzing like a hive on fire. It had started sometime around midnight. A few reposts, a few tags. By 3 a.m., his name was trending. By 6, the video had hit nearly 5 million views. The clip was short, barely 30 seconds, but it hit like lightning. On TikTok, Gen Z stitched the video with reactions. Stunned faces, slow claps, tearful nods. One creator posted, "This is what it looks like when a kid meets his first real teacher, and it's not even in a classroom." Another said, "She didn't roast him. She raised him." The caption stuck. Ego and soul. She raised him, let the music teach elsewhere. The tone was sharper. Twitter caught fire before breakfast. A still from the video, Jasmine mid-note, eyes closed, the setting sun casting a halo over her curls, went viral. The tweet read, "She didn't just play guitar, she taught that boy how to be human." Over 120,000 retweets, 400,000 likes. And Jake? He woke up to the storm with the weight of the world already pressing on his chest. When ego met soul, and soul won. A split-screen edit. On the left, Jake mid-solo, shirt damp with sweat, fingers blurring across the fretboard, jaw clenched like he was in a fistfight. On the right, Jasmine, standing calm under golden evening light, her fingers barely moving, her guitar whispering something real. And then near the end, her voice, clean, soft, devastating. "You play well, but have you ever let the music hit you first?" The clip ended on Jake's stunned silence. Black screen, no music. Just that one sentence echoing like a challenge and a truth all at once. By morning, the internet had already picked sides. His inbox was flooded. DMs from strangers, fellow guitarists, even a few reporters. His name was being mentioned on music blogs, reaction channels, and podcasts. Some were kind, some were cruel, most were loud. He scrolled through the comments in silence. "Bro got humbled in 4K. Speed ain't soul, man." She felt every note. He was trying to win. She was trying to heal. That's why she won. Jake set the phone down. Hard. The heat in his chest burned with something messy. Shame, frustration, but also something else. Something like clarity. No one out there knew how long he had worked, how many times he had been brushed aside, how much he had to fight just to be seen. But now all they saw was a kid who came in, loud and left quiet. And maybe that was the truth. Meanwhile, a deeper conversation began to bloom. Teachers across the country started sharing the clip with their own captions. Not mocking, reflecting. One music teacher in Chicago posted, "This is why I tell my students, speed is impressive, but sincerity is unforgettable." Another, a high school band director, shared, "This is the difference between playing notes and telling stories. She didn't play at the crowd, she played with them. Classrooms played the clip. Students watched silently. Some were moved, others stayed quiet, thinking hard about what it meant to perform and what it meant to connect." In the background, journalists scrambled to get the story. A segment was pitched on national morning shows. Two major outlets requested interviews. Everyone wanted to know about the guitar battle in New Hampshire that broke the internet. They reached out to Jasmine's office, reached out again, but her response was short and final. "This story isn't about me," she told them. "It's about a young man learning how to grow." She turned down every invitation. She didn't post a video, didn't clarify anything, didn't try to control the narrative. While the world called her a mentor, a musical hero, a philosopher with strings, she stayed completely offline. No victory lap, no trending hashtag acknowledgement. And that silence spoke louder than any interview ever could. Jake couldn't avoid the noise, even if he tried. At school, classmates glanced at him like he was famous and exposed at the same time. Some nodded in respect. Some said nothing at all. The teachers were gentler. One just patted his shoulder as he walked past. No words exchanged. But he knew what it meant. And still, the question Jasmine had asked rang in his head like a bell that wouldn't stop. "Have you ever let the music hit you first?" It echoed not as a scolding, but as an invitation. Late one night, a week after the battle, Jake sat down in front of his phone. Not to perform, not to defend himself, but to speak. Just speak. He looked into the camera, face bare of attitude or armor, and said, "A lot of people saw me lose. I get it. It hurt. But maybe what really happened is I started learning, and that's harder than playing fast." He paused, then added quieter, "Thank you, Jasmine. I get it now." He didn't tag her, didn't drop a link, just posted it and closed the app. Far away in a quiet office lined with music law books and framed photos of past cases, Jasmine watched the clip. She didn't react, just closed her laptop, smiled faintly, and turned toward the window, where a guitar leaned quietly against the wall. Some victories didn't need trophies. Some moments didn't belong to the internet. They belonged to the silence that followed, to the student finally ready to listen, and to the music waiting patiently to speak. The dust had long settled on that viral guitar duel, but its echoes never truly died. For a whole year, the town whispered about it like a local legend, the kind of story that took on new color each time it was retold. Jake felt the weight of it wherever he went, a mixture of shame and strange pride that people still remembered him at his worst moment. Across social media, the debate had flared, then cooled, then flared again, each spark fueled by a passing mention or a short clip rediscovered. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept her distance from the spotlight, deflecting interviews and redirecting praise. She had said her piece. The showdown wasn't about winning or losing, but about growth. And though Jake spent months wrestling with that truth, he emerged on the other side changed. Now, a year later, he found himself standing backstage at the very same community park, heart pounding, ready to face the crowd that once saw him fall apart. The banner above the stage read, "Strings for Tomorrow Again," its corners fluttering in the late summer breeze. He took a long breath, glanced at the spot where he had melted under the bright lights last year, and tried to steady the new beat inside him. He wasn't alone this time. A small group of middle schoolers, no older than 12 or 13, huddled around him with violins, cellos, and clarinets clutched tight in their nervous fingers. They were part of the school's fledgling music program, the very cause that these fundraisers aim to support. Jake had volunteered to help them prepare, giving tips on chord progressions, tempo, and stage presence. Every session reminded him of how he used to think speed and volume were everything, but now he saw something else in their anxious eyes. Heart. They played because it made them feel alive, not because they needed to prove anything. That humbling realization had led Jake to pick up his own guitar again, but this time with a different purpose. Instead of war, he was after connection. Instead of showing off, he was guiding a group of kids to stand under the lights and let music speak. And he felt a sense of responsibility swell inside him, a soft trembling in his chest that was equal parts excitement and fear. Beyond the curtain, the park buzzed with families, older couples, and local supporters who remembered last year's drama all too well. The stage lights glowed amber, just like before, but somehow the atmosphere felt less hostile. A sense of curiosity hung in the air. Would Jake come back swinging, or had he learned something deeper from the showdown that rocked him so publicly? Organizers bustled around, adjusting microphones and wiping sweat off their brows in the humid August evening. The faint aroma of popcorn and kettle corn wafted through, while squeaky fold-out chairs provided seating for the older crowd. This time, no one openly doubted Jake, but they also didn't expect miracles. They were here to see the local kids do their best, maybe tap their feet along, then head home with a story. Still, a certain tension lingered, a ripple of possibility that maybe, just maybe, something more important than music would happen tonight. Jake finished tuning his acoustic guitar, glancing over at the small ensemble lined up beside him. Their eyes sparkled with excitement and nerves. One girl clutched her clarinet so tight, her knuckles whitened. A young violinist shifted from foot to foot, chewing her lip. Jake smiled, remembering how it felt to stand on that stage for the first time. Only last year, his confidence had been a steel wall, built on ego rather than genuine love of the craft. He silently hoped these kids would never have to learn the hard way how hollow that wall could be. Catching the violinist's anxious gaze, he gave a small nod and mouthed, "You got this." She exhaled in relief, nodded back, and readied her bow. As the curtain parted, a soft wave of applause greeted them, more encouraging than raucous. Flashbacks of last year's tension flickered through Jake's mind, but he shook them off. Today wasn't about him proving anything. It was about leaning on one another. The spotlight was gentler this time, or maybe it just felt gentler because Jake was no longer waging war against it. The kids spread out in a semicircle, instruments poised, while Jake settled near the center with his guitar in hand. He breathed in deeply. Then he began to strum the first chords of Lean on Me, slow and steady, letting the simple melody rise and fall like a promise. The violins joined in, slightly shaky but determined. The clarinet followed, its tone pure yet trembling with youthful earnestness. A soft percussion beat tapped from somewhere behind them, courtesy of a student drummer who had volunteered at the last minute. Together they weren't pitch perfect, but they were real. And the crowd heard that authenticity, leaning in, clapping softly in time. Jake found himself smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in a long while. For once, he wasn't drowning out the world. He was part of it, letting the chords carry him and the kids forward. As the song built, that sense of unity swelled. It wasn't about solos or flashy technique. It was about many voices blending into one uplifting tune, about a message bigger than any single ego. Each note the kids played, each chord Jake strummed, felt like another step away from the bitterness of last year. He could almost see the ghost of his past self scowling at the corner of the stage, demanding applause, seeking validation. But that ghost had no power here. The crowd began to sing along in parts, older men tapping their canes against the grass, mothers swaying gently with toddlers in their arms, friends wrapping arms around each other and joining the chorus. The music wasn't perfect, but it felt good, pure. This was the future the fundraiser was trying to protect, one where young people learned not just how to play, but how to connect. And Jake, guiding them, felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with being the best. Then he saw her. Off to the side, near the third row of fold-out chairs, stood Jasmine, unmistakable even with sunglasses perched on her nose. She wore a casual jacket over simple jeans and a calm expression that suggested she was here simply to observe, not command the spotlight. A year ago, she had walked into Jake's life like a thunderbolt, a quiet force that exposed all his insecurities in front of everyone. He had hated her for it at first, resentful that she'd humiliated him in the one arena he thought he owned. But time and honesty had softened that anger, revealing that she hadn't humiliated him at all. She had revealed him, forcing him to face the emptiness behind his virtuosity. Now she simply stood there, arms crossed lightly, chin lowered, offering a small nod that said, "I see you." Her presence shot adrenaline through Jake's veins, but this time it wasn't fear or rage. It was gratitude. He kept strumming, locking eyes with her for just a moment, before focusing again on the kids around him. The final chorus of Lean on Me rose higher, small voices finding courage as the crowd joined in. Jake added a gentle backing vocal, guiding them through each line. The percussion student tapped out a humble flourish on a snare. The violinist grew bolder on her riffs, and the clarinetist finally found her sweet spot in the harmonies. The entire park seemed to sway in unison, driven not by flashy solos, but by a shared heartbeat. Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't sadness. It was something like relief. Or maybe the quiet joy of discovering that music could be so much more than a battlefield. It could be a home, a place where people lean on each other's notes and lift each other up. And when the last chord finally faded into the summer air, the applause that followed felt different. Not a roar of impressed excitement, but a warm, enveloping wave of acceptance. Jake bowed alongside the middle school orchestra, every kid beaming at the crowd, some giggling with excitement, others looking like they might burst with pride. As the applause died down, an organizer came on stage to thank everyone, talking about how important the music program was and how the funds raised would give more kids access to instruments. Jake took a step back, letting the kids have the spotlight they deserved, but his gaze flicked toward the third row again. Jasmine was gone, or at least he couldn't see her anymore. Part of him felt a pang of disappointment. He wanted to thank her, properly, without the bitterness, without the barrier of last year's tension. He took a deep breath, eased his guitar strap off, and passed it to one of the volunteers. He made his way off the stage with the kids, guiding them down the steps carefully as the event organizers prepared for the next act. People patted his shoulder, complimented him on the arrangement, but Jake's eyes scanned the moving crowd in search of Jasmine. He spotted a familiar figure just beyond the edge of the tents, near an old oak tree that provided shade. She stood with her sunglasses lowered, a small smile on her lips as she observed the hustle of the fundraiser. Jake excused himself from a brief chat with the teacher and headed in her direction, feeling his heart pound in a not unpleasant way. She looked up as he approached, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Well, here you are." He stood a couple of feet away, running a hand through his hair, uncertain how to begin. Memories of last year's meltdown crashed through him. His speed, her calm, the humiliating hush when she'd shown him what music really could be. But now those memories felt less like scars and more like steps he had to climb to arrive here. He swallowed once, cleared his throat, and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he said, voice steady but soft. "Thanks for not embarrassing me last year. Thanks for teaching me how to listen." Jasmine tilted her head, arms folded, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. A slight breeze rustled the leaves above, sending a pattern of light and shadow across her sunglasses. She didn't immediately answer, letting Jake's words settle between them like the final chord of a song. Then she exhaled a gentle laugh, not mocking, just acknowledging the weight of his confession. "I didn't teach you," she replied, almost a whisper. "The music did." Jake nodded, a small smile crossing his lips. "Right," he said, remembering the countless nights he'd spent after their duel, sitting alone, plucking notes that no longer needed to scream. "But still," he added, "you showed me where to start." A moment passed where neither spoke. The world around them felt quieter than it was, like they stood in a bubble of shared understanding that cut through the chattering families, the sizzling food stands, and the muffled announcements on the speakers. Finally, Jasmine gave him a simple nod of approval, then shifted her weight to leave. But Jake reached out, not touching her arm, just lifting his palm slightly as if to stop her for one more second. "You staying for the rest of the show?" he asked, blinking against the midday glare. She chuckled softly, tucking her sunglasses into her collar. I might head out soon, but that's not important," she said, lifting her chin toward the stage. "The kids did great. That's what matters." Jake followed her gaze, noticing the middle schoolers collecting their instrument cases and beaming at each other with the unfiltered pride only kids can have. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, an echo of that sense of purpose he discovered. Seeing them so joyful reminded him that maybe, just maybe, the best thing he could do was help them keep that spark alive, the spark he nearly lost to his own ego. Jasmine turned back to him. "Keep listening, Jake," she said, more a gentle directive than an order. "Sometimes the notes you don't play are the ones that matter most." He swallowed, determined to hold on to that lesson this time. She started to walk away, steps confident yet unhurried, and he watched her go, feeling no sting of defeat. Instead, he felt a calm resolve. The tension in his shoulders melted, replaced by a sense of clarity and gratitude. Maybe he'd never be a star on a grand stage, but he could be something else. Someone who understood music not as a competition, but as a shared language. The crowd cheered again at something on stage. A raffle winner, perhaps. Jake glanced back toward the park center, where the next act was setting up. He realized he had no desire to jump back in front, hog the mic, or crank the amp to drown everyone out. Instead, he wanted to step behind the scenes, guide those kids to perfect the next tune, show them chords, dynamics, how to blend their sounds. He wanted to be a small part of a larger harmony. His heart felt lighter. The memory of last year's humiliation now felt like a necessary chord change in the song of his life. Without that clash, he'd never have found the path he was on right now. A path that led him to connect with younger musicians, to cherish quiet notes, and to truly feel the music. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, then made his way back toward the stage, weaving past families and folding chairs. The band teacher waved him over with a grin. The kids looked at him with eyes that said, "We did good, right?" And Jake nodded, offering them a thumbs up that made them giggle. No flash, no drama, just genuine appreciation. Before he got lost in the crowd, he stole one last glance around the park. Jasmine was gone, or at least she was no longer visible by the old oak tree. But her presence lingered, woven into the whisper of the summer wind, etched into the memories of a battle that was never really a fight. Jake turned, shoulders back, and let the echo of her words guide him forward. Play from the heart, not the ego. And as the next act took the stage, the notes that filled the park felt like they carried the promise of a new beginning. One where a boy once obsessed with speed and flash now found peace in the quieter spaces, the places where music had room to breathe and hearts had room to grow. As the music faded and the crowd returned to their summer conversations, Jake walked away from the stage not as a performer, but as a listener. A year ago, he had stood in that same place trying to win, trying to dominate, trying to make the world hear him by force. But now he understood that the loudest sound in the world couldn't replace one quiet note played with honesty. His journey hadn't been about music, not really. It had been about learning to sit with discomfort, to swallow pride, and to admit that being right wasn't the same as being real. He had been laughed at, judged, and torn apart on screens across the internet. They called him arrogant, called him hollow. Some of it was fair, some of it wasn't. But the truth buried in the humiliation wasn't that he lost a battle, it was that he never knew what he was fighting for in the first place. And yet, here's what the crowd never saw. The nights Jake stayed up playing slow blues until his hands ached, trying to find one note that felt like truth. They never saw the guilt eating him alive when he watched that viral video for the 100th time. Not out of vanity, but out of a desperate hunger to understand what went wrong. They never saw the teacher in him quietly bloom, the one who now sat cross-legged in classrooms, teaching middle schoolers how to listen to their own heartbeat in a chord. He didn't get a redemption arc handed to him. He earned it the hard way. Through silence, through surrender, through learning how to feel instead of perform. And that's what made the lesson unforgettable. This story, in the end, wasn't about a prodigy being humiliated. It wasn't even about a woman outplaying a teenage boy. It was about what happens when someone finally stops shouting long enough to hear their own soul speak back. Jasmine didn't crush Jake with a solo. She cracked him open with kindness. She saw through the armor, past the riffs, beneath the speed, and instead of swinging harder, she played softer. And that contrast, that quiet defiance, it changed everything. It taught Jake, and everyone watching, that skill without soul is just noise, and that sometimes the greatest act of strength is to lower your volume and let someone else be heard. The real injustice wasn't that Jake was shown up. It was that no one had ever taught him to be still, to trust silence, to believe that music didn't have to be a weapon. And in a world obsessed with winning, where every stage feels like a war zone. That kind of lesson almost never gets through. But it did. One quiet woman, one simple riff, and one question spoken without ego. Have you ever let the music hit you first? It was more than a question. It was a mirror. And Jake, for all his flaws, had the courage to look into it. So when the final scene closes, not with a battle, but with a boy and a guitar surrounded by kids, playing Lean on Me under a soft August sky, we're left with something rare. A story where the hero isn't the fastest, the flashiest, or even the winner. He's the one who learned to listen. And in doing so, he became more than a guitarist. He became human. And as the last note faded beneath the twilight sky, Jake didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The music had said everything for him. Where once there had been fire, now there was clarity. Where there had been noise, now there was space. He had walked through the fire of humiliation, of millions watching him fall apart, and emerged not unscathed, but reborn. And Jasmine, she didn't stick around for applause. She simply faded into the crowd like she'd never been there, leaving behind nothing but a question that echoed louder than any solo. Why do you play? That was the story, yes, but it's more than just a story, it's a mirror. One that every one of us has to face, whether we hold a guitar, a mic, or just our own fear of being unheard. Because this isn't just about a teenage boy and a six-string reckoning. It's about every person who's ever mistaken volume for value. It's about every time you were told to shout louder, push harder, move faster, when maybe what you really needed was to listen. Jake faced that injustice, live under bright lights with the internet watching. His fall was public, merciless, and brutally viral. But that's what makes his rise even more important. He was ridiculed, edited into punchlines, turned into a meme, but he kept listening. He chose to learn, chose humility over image, chose to rebuild himself not with speed, but with soul. And in doing so, he became something so rare in our world, someone who grew because of failure, not in spite of it. So now it's your turn. If you felt something during this story, if a note hit you, if a lyric echoed somewhere inside you, you know this wasn't just entertainment. It was a challenge, a reminder to look inward, to ask yourself, are you playing to impress or to connect? Are you speaking to be heard or to be understood? Are you chasing applause or are you learning to stand in the silence that follows? Don't scroll past this and forget it. Don't let the lesson fade like background noise, because somewhere out there, someone needs your voice, but not your noise. They need your honesty. If you believe in that, if you believe that music, art, growth, and even failure can mean something, then don't just watch stories like this. Support them, share them, carry them forward. Hit that like button not for the algorithm, but for the message. Subscribe if you want more than just surface-level drama. If you want stories that pull you in and don't let go. And leave a comment. What was your turning point? What moment made you finally listen? Because this isn't the end of Jake's story. It's the beginning of yours. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.